Good.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you all for joining and taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak about this important project and all the wonderful history behind it that still makes a huge impact on not only Black lives but our entire nation as well, and perhaps you could argue the world for sure. Before we get started, I wanted to.
You froze a little bit, Nick.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Am I okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So very excited to welcome our guests here today, and I could spend a lot of time talking about all the amazing and inspiring work that you all are doing, and all your accolades as well. But I like to give folks an opportunity for them to introduce themselves and tell their own stories. So if we could go around and if you could just introduce yourselves to our listeners, tell us a little bit about who you are, what inspired you, or what brought you to this exciting project in our discussion today. I could start and then I'll pass it around. So my name is Nick Musney. I have a show on KXSF, a community radio station in San Francisco called Indie for the People. I initially started the show to highlight, indie artists who identify as people of color, queer, and women, just because I felt there's an underrepresentation in the indie scene. Since the murder of George Floyd by state violence, like many others, I was really shook and felt like I needed to use all my platforms and divert and all my energy to the movement, or as much as I could, while sustaining it. So I started holding these roundtable discussions, so bringing in leaders from the Black Lives Matter movement, Black Trans Lives Matter movement, as well as the defund the police and abolishing prisons movement. So and all the intersectionalities of these struggles. So I do some organizing here in Salinas, where I'm from, but I live in Oakland. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself. So I'll go ahead and pass it to Jill.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. I'm Jilchristina Vest, and I've been in Oakland since 1986. I'm originally from Chicago, and I am the homeowner where the mural is going to be going. Yeah, that's about it. That's my introduction.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Joan. I'm sure we'll get to know you more throughout the conversation.
There's so much more to say, exactly, but
I'm sure James and Ericka have a lot more to say about all the great things that you have to offer. So if you'd like to pass it to either one of them.
James is frozen.
Okay. Maybe we'll go to Ericka. Hopefully James will get back and connected.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. James, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, mine's kind of froze up too, so I'm not sure how that's working. But yeah, man, my name is James Shields. I grew up in Sacramento and Stockton, California. I've spent maybe around 8 years on the East Coast, and I've been in Oakland since 2013. Yeah, since 2013. Gone into like education, design, and of course visual arts. And so currently I work for a labor union, which is allows me to have a direct impact on social justice efforts out here. But I'm pretty much just all about creating and making art and taking on these opportunities as they come, which brought me here.
All right, thank you, James. Ericka.
Well, the reason that I'm here is because Jilchristina offered her house, two sides of her house, let's say, as a mural to honor women, and specifically women of the Black Panther Party. And I am one of many of those women. And I know that Nick, that this is something that's never been done before. So Jill, in all of her humility about who she is and what she's done, that's fine. But I want to publicly thank her for thinking not only of the women, and we must remember them and say their names, who've been killed over time, not just recently, but throughout history who have been killed, as you put it, because of state violence and also community violence. And so to have this mural in West Oakland is amazing. I'm from Washington, D.C. originally, and I went to school outside of Philadelphia and heard about the Black Panther Party and left and drove across the country with my friend who later became my husband, who was later assassinated by the FBI, Joan Huggins. And after the party lasted from 1966 to 1982.
Mhm.
And almost during the entire time, I wondered why not only the language, but the iconography of the movements in general, from the civil rights movement, and even before that, were primarily about men. And we all know that women are the ones who get things done. Right? I mean, our mothers, our aunties, our grandmothers, our wives, our beloveds of all places in our lives. Women get things done, and that is true of African American women because we have had to, and because it is something I find like a beautiful gift in the hearts of human beings, and women let it shine because they're not socialized to tamp it down in a certain way. I wish that men were not socialized to tamp down all the loving feelings that they have.
Right.
But I digress. So one of the things that I used to do in the 80s and 90s, and then I stopped doing it, was that every time I spoke somewhere, every time I was engaged with students or community organizations, I would say all the names of the women of the Black Panther Party that I could remember in that moment. And people appreciated it because they never ever heard these names. And so when Jill called me, I was so touched. And every single party member that I have talked to, if they're still alive, and I'm sure the ones that are not still alive are somewhere looking on this, they are so touched by it. And I talked to someone yesterday who said, well, that's a long time coming.
Yes.
And she ran a list of party members' names to me from the chapter in New York City. And we may know Afeni Shakur because she's Tupac's mom, but often women are known in the shadows of men. So this brings the women out of the shadows and into the light. So that's why I'm here. And currently I facilitate conversations about racial inequities, gender inequities, and all of those things. I think this is the most uplifting thing I'm doing, uplifting in terms of my own heart, that I'm doing currently. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Ericka, and your voice, your lived experience in the party and, throughout the history that we are, that Jill and James is hoping to recognize in this project is so important. So thank you for being here. To kind of go off of that, I know, this mural is a statement of history, as you said, too often untold, of the lasting contributions of Black women, not only in the Black Panther Party, but to struggle for liberation of all oppressed people. We will get into that history soon. Ericka, you touched upon on that a little bit. But I wanted to ask you, Jill, could you elaborate on your intentions behind this project? How is it, as you have said, a way to thank Oakland, your community, to highlight these often overshadowed histories of the invaluable labor of Black women and their revolutionary visions and initiatives for community support? And how is it that the women who are the subject of this mural brought you where you are today?
Excellent question. Well, for starters, I was born in 1966, which is the birth year of the Black Panther Party, and that significance is not lost on me. I was born and raised in Chicago, which is also a very important place for the Panther Party that I did not know until I was close to an adult. And I always say that I was born and raised in Chicago, but I became an adult in Oakland. And I became Jill in Oakland. And that included going to San Francisco State, where I had professors like Ericka Huggins and Angela Davis and amazing activists like Mural. And it's where I became activated. I was 18, 19, I think, when I started at State. And yeah, I became activated by these women, Donna Hubbard, Janetta Richards. And I remember at that age, and people would tease me, where I'd say, I cannot wait until I'm 40. I want to be just like them. And I was like, nobody wants to be 40 when they're 19. I was like, I do. I want to carry myself. I want that fierceness of these Black women that I was surrounded by that were such beautiful professor aunties that I was growing up under and learning under. It was really super powerful for me. And then fast forward to, I worked at an organization, Oakland Community Council for Urban Renewal in Oakland, and I had to do a neighborhood profile for all of the different neighborhoods in the city of Oakland. So Fruitvale and San Antonio and Rockridge. And that meant I had to interview people, I had to photograph the neighborhoods, I had to research the history and the beginnings of those neighborhoods. And when I got to West Oakland, I was like, I have found my home. I mean, it was almost instantaneous. Not only the Victorians that I fall in love with that looked like the Victorian I grew up in Chicago, same color, I mean, various things that were just very synchronicitous, and if that's a word, synchronity. And so I found out all of this history in addition to the Black Panther history I already had. And I decided in that moment, it was like 96, I think, that I was going to buy a house here and that I was going to live here forever, specifically because the Black Panther Party was born here. And so fast forward to 99, I found my house, but I didn't really have a dime to my name and had 3 jobs, and my community rallied together. Everybody that I knew from San Francisco State, people that I'd grown up with, people lent me $20,000. I mean, it was that serious. And it was really intense because I walked into this house and started crying. I knew it was my house instantly, and I knew I wasn't going to do anything until I got it. And the owner actually, I wrote him a letter and told him, this is my house. I know I'm not going to offer you the most money, but you're still going to sell it to me. And he did. So I rallied together, my community rallied together for me, and the house wasn't livable. It was falling down at the rafters. The roof was caved in. And again, my community came and pulled down walls and tore up floors and pulled out toilets and went to the dump yard with me. I mean, literally day in and day out for 2.5 years. They housed me for 2.5 years because the house was not livable. So it's all about the community. I could not be here. I would not be here if it weren't for my friends and my family. And then so I finally moved in and then slowly learned more that I'm across the street where Huey Newton was felled in 1989. I'm around the corner from 1048 Peralta, which is the Black Panther headquarters. These things I did not know when I purchased my house. So then it just became even more clear that this was all meant to be. And my friends now are telling me that this is my destiny. And I genuinely feel that it really, I have been working my entire life for this moment. And the reason behind the thank you, I think, is that we're in this time where I was feeling so despondent and genuinely depressed when the rebellion's going on and it's just one thing after another and your back just starts to bend, and it was overwhelming for me. And I can't even imagine being on this planet longer and how exhausting it is. And so I was doing an abundance meditation, and one of the meditations was you need to do more of that which you want in your life. So if you want more abundance, you need to be more abundant. If you want more love, you need to be more loving. And I wanted joy. And so I said, I need to find something that brings me joy. I need to celebrate something, celebrate my existence, celebrate the existence of Black women.
Yes.
Not the murder of them, but the celebration of their existence. And that was really important to me. And that's where it started. And I would have to concur with Ericka that it has brought me an immeasurable level of joy over the past 90 days, very unexpected, and overwhelming, just chills on the daily basis, the stories and the people. It's really, it's been amazing. So I will sit in my place and try and honor to the best of my ability those that created the situation that allowed me to be here today. So
thank you, Joan. And what a beautiful story of community, and for you to find that housing, which is so important, I feel. And actually, you know, I believe one of the 10 points in the Panther Party, right, is housing fit for a human being. So just so many markers of connection from history to your story. So thank you for telling that. You know, I also wanted, yeah.
If I could just interject on that point, I have a rental on the first floor, and for 20 years, I've been very intentional with renting to Black and brown and queer people, and putting that in the advertisement, and also making sure that I rent below the ridiculous market prices that are happening. And so many people telling me, but Joe, you could double your rent. I'm like, but why would I do that? There's no reason for me to do that, and people can't afford to live that way. So it's been really important for me in this house to create housing for other people, and affordable housing and safe housing. So that does follow through.
Love it. Thank you, Joe, for doing that. And you know, this mural, I think, is not only a tribute to the often invisible and or glaringly less visible history of Black women, as we mentioned. Jill, can you speak about these the struggles of visibility that still exist for Black women that helped to inspire this movie? The importance of representation, you know, the Say Her Name movement for Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and so many others, and how those stories helped to inspire this mural as well.
Well, it's interesting, at the top of the hour, you mentioned George Floyd, but you didn't mention Breonna Taylor. And that was a part of my depression when it was, and both lives are equally important. It's not about that. But it's about how we always name the men, and we just assume you know about the women. We just assume, and it shouldn't be a competition, and there shouldn't be any hierarchy to it, and there shouldn't be, but there is, sadly. And we have to spend so much time as Black women demanding that our existence be valued and be seen. So for me, the mural, the intention behind the mural has to do with healing, has to do with mental healing, emotional health, mental health, and that which comes from when you see yourself reflected, when you see your history reflected, and when you see joy reflected, right? So often the success of the machine that we're impressed at, the success of white supremacy, whatever it might be given Monday or Tuesday, is the ability to traumatize and re-traumatize the oppressed, to where you become so exhausted that all you're doing is fighting to not be traumatized. And what I'm trying to do as I get older, and then I'm not able to go to the streets anymore, I'm too old for it. I don't want to, you know, that's like various things, is instead I'm going to start fighting for joy, because it's also a form of liberation. There's various different ways to liberate yourself. And I think the mural, what I want to happen is Black girls and Black women and in my community to be able to walk up to it and feel good, feel happy, feel seen, feel prideful, you know, straighten their back a little bit, put their shoulders back a little bit, because the world makes our shoulders curl, makes our back bend. And I want us those of us that are freedom fighters or liberate, whatever you want to call us, I want us to start fighting for joy, because it's rejuvenating and we need that reboot. And I don't want people to be sad when they look at the mural. I want them to be happy and amazed and inspired and know that they are of these women. These women are them, that there's no separation. It's just a continuum. I don't care if you're 7 or 70 looking at the mural. These women are you, you are them, you are of them. They're your ancestors, they're your peers, they're your aunties, they're your neighbors, they're your grandmother, they're everybody around you. And yeah.
Thank you for that, Jill. I feel like, you know, so many folks who, like myself, who kind of got reactivated into the movement after the murder of George Floyd. You know, we don't ask ourselves often enough, like, why didn't this same response, why wasn't this, you know, the murder of Breonna Taylor elicit the same response? So I think that is a really important question for us to ask. So thank you for bringing that up, as well as.
It started with, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the mural started with Say Her Name, with me in my house saying Breonna Taylor, and knowing that the movement was born of Sandra Bland, because the mural will also feature Sandra Bland most likely on the back half of the house. Because when she was murdered, that's when that movement was born, of people coming out and saying, why do you only take to the streets when these people are murdered, but this Black woman was killed and we're not taking to the streets? And it's exhausting. I get it. It's exhausting. We can't take to the streets every single time, but there definitely is an imbalance. And they happened almost at the exact same time. So the rage was there, but there was no, I can't explain it. I think that we all know that there wasn't the same outcry. When you watch the news and you watch the protests, they weren't crying out. Initially, they did eventually. And this isn't a criticism, and I'm not trying to say somebody should have done it better. Please don't misunderstand me by saying that. It's just a statement of why Say Her Name exists. And it's important that that keeps being remembered. It's not my imagination. It's not Ericka's imagination, you know, and that's, I think, what's important.
Yes. Ericka, I wanted to you know, you spoke a little bit about your,
Okay, for a second. So James is back, and he didn't get to say very much originally because it was frozen. Isn't that true?
Oh yeah, James. Yeah, I do. James, do you want to either respond to Jill, or I do have one question for you. We could go to you, James. It's up to you.
You can go ahead and start off with the question, Nick.
Okay, yeah, of course. So, you know, Ericka spoke a little, you know, a little bit about her, you know, the history of the Black Panther Party and her involvement with the movement. And, you know, speaking about the Say Her Name movement with Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, you as you know, one of the lead artists on this mural, it seems like you're charged with the task of kind of paying tribute to this history while representing its relevance in the movement for Black lives today. So can you tell us a little bit about your research and your discovery process in planning this project? What has surprised you, or what has inspired you?
Yeah, I think one that my research started essentially from ground zero. You know, my generation has been fortunate to live off the fruits of the work that was done, and so much of that is taken for granted. You know, the fact that there's African American studies programs, you know, all the social programs that were adopted by the United States. Like I've taken those personally for granted and have not been an historian of like revolutionary acts. And so I've had to start from ground zero and not only understanding the party, but also understanding what feminism is and how it evolved through the Black Panther Party, right? And so it's been super helpful in regards to reading literature by Black women for Black women in the Panther Party. So this book right here by Ashley D. Farmer
Yes.
is super helpful for me to paint a portrait of what's already being captured, right? Because from listening to Ericka and Jill, you understand that there's a vastness that's taking place for the goals and the missions and the outcome of this mural project. And so studying has been a great foundation for me to put my artistic vision to this inspiration and to this history that I'm getting firsthand as well.
Could you repeat the title of that book, James, for us?
It's Remaking Black Power: How Black Women Transformed an Era by Ashley D. Farmer.
Thank you. What is anything in your research that surprised you, or any challenges that you face in this whole project in general?
I think the first thing is understanding that the status quo of history needs an asterisk by it, you know, by it simply being told through the lens and the value of like a white male society. And so understanding that there's an asterisk into this popular history really showed me that there has to be an ownership of learning and an ownership of educating oneself on history, you know, not to take it for granted, because all it took was really a YouTube search or a book to realize that there's multiple narratives to specifically the Black Panther Party. But personally, what really took me, that I've really been like enjoying, is the fact that the Panther Party really was an evolutionary exploration, you know, on what revolution is and what fighting and changing the system is. And so what I'm taking away from this are the different stages of revolutionary Black women, and how that was all part of the Panther Party, Black Panther Party, at different points in times. And I think that's really what I'm focusing on in trying to construct through this mural. But mind you, we're also working on an educational coloring book, and through my research in that, I'm pulling strings out of like a yarn ball, you know, that's kind of tangled up. And the more I pull, the looser it gets, that I'm able to frame a narrative of how, and allows me to frame this narrative and also give another lens to history, you know. So what wasn't accomplished that hasn't been accomplished so far, we have another opportunity to continue adding to this narrative and to this legacy.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of the yarn ball, and the multiple entry points and narratives in history. Let's go into that history a little bit. If we go back to you, Ericka, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your lived experience as a leader in the Black Panther Party and beyond. From transformational visions, as James alluded to, and how we address educational inequities in poor communities of color, to free health clinics, to free and reduced lunch at schools. We owe so much to the Black Panther Party and the programs that you and so many others created that not only survive, but literally support the survival of so many communities across our nation today. You mentioned earlier that you joined the party in 1968 when you're just 18 years old. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to that moment? When you heard of the Black Panther parties all the way out in Washington, D.C., right, or Philadelphia? What led you to, what inspired you to drive across the country, and how did one become a member of the Black Panther Party? How did that happen for you?
Well, it was very simple. When I read an article in a magazine that no longer exists, but it was called Ramparts Magazine. And it was an article on the arrest and upcoming trial of Huey Newton. and it was all about freeing Huey, becoming a part of his defense committee. But bigger than that, it was an explanation of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And what I got from reading the article on my own is that self-defense can look differently than we're taught to think of it. We're taught to look at it in a very male way. Somebody, walks up to you and starts a mess, you got to defend yourself and the people you love physically. But then when I was able to read, after reading that article, I heard about the Breakfast for Children program. I knew about the police watch. And none of this was violent, although mainstream media made it seem so, because here we were, very young Black people saying no to the established order, which we had been taught for generations to settle for. And we were just not settling. We weren't negotiating. We were pretty brash about that in verbally. We weren't asking permission, we weren't negotiating, we weren't waiting for an okay. Because we knew that if we waited, it probably wouldn't happen. We recognized that, as June Jordan, one of my favorite poets, says in a poem that she offered to South African women, we are the ones we are waiting for. And so we knew that. And so we created the breakfast program, which then, as James said, or inferred, the federal government was so embarrassed by the number of breakfasts we served all across the country: Oakland, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, North Carolina, Washington, DC, whatever city with a Black and poor population. And I say and poor because that was how we talked about it in the late 60s, but what we meant was what we say now: Black, Indigenous people of color, and poor white people. And we formed coalitions so that when we opened a People's Free Medical Clinic, it wasn't just for Black people. That's what touched me about the party when I first read about it. What I read was, and we are for all Black, poor, and oppressed people. So then I started thinking about women in general. And there was something called the Gay Liberation Movement then, which is now a way expanded vision of what it means to be queer. But I knew that there was oppression there. And if you happen to be born into a body where these things intersect, where race, class, gender, and sexual orientation, excuse me, and perhaps your citizenship are all in one human body, it's a very, very, very difficult and often dangerous life. So the Black Panther Party taught me how to think big, because that's what we intended. We wanted to imagine a world and then live in it. Imagine a world where there were no boundaries, where there were no unnecessary differences made, where humanity could shine. Let me drink some water. So that's what made me join, and that's what made me stay. And there were 65 community survival programs. People don't know that any more than they know the names of women in the party and the women who ran those community survival programs. I mentioned the Breakfast for School Children program. I did not mention the free food program. I want to mention our educational programs, which started with after-school liberation schools, sometimes Saturday schools, but then there was the Oakland Community School, which was a tuition-free, student-based, community-centered, parent-friendly, revolutionary elementary school. And when I say revolutionary, I'm not going to think in terms of Webster's dictionary or any other kind of dictionary, because it will probably make me want to not use that word. But by revolutionary, I mean that we turned the whole idea of education for Black and brown children 360 degrees. We took the box that education for poor and youth of color, we took that box, turned it upside down and shook it out and decided what we wanted that would bring joy for learning to the children. What did they need in order to experience that joy throughout the day? What would make their parents happy, their grandparents who are often raising them because of mass incarceration? Their daughters and sons were in prisons. So we kept thinking like that. And then my friend, a name that you would not hear unless I tell it to you, so I'm going to say her name right now, Joan Kelly Williams, was a counterpart in all of this revolutionary activity. And she was the woman who almost, I don't want to say single-handedly, but she was the lead in making sure that though the Oakland Community School building at 61st and International Boulevard, the building is still there, it was an old church building and we bought it for the school, that in the evenings and weekends, that was the Oakland Community Learning Center where adults could come for literacy education, where seniors were provided services, including vans that took them to banks and grocery stores and clinic and doctor visits, and a teen program that was inspired by the teens talking to me and to Joan about wishing they had had an Oakland Community School so that all of their options weren't just slinging drugs and prostituting. So we really listen to people with these programs, and there is if people want to know more about them, there is a book that used to be downloadable, but I know that it's still online, and it's called The Black Panther Party Community Service Programs, or Service to People programs. And it was compiled by David Hilliard a long time ago. And all of the programs are there, listed in short form or with some kind of historical context. And we did this because we knew they could be replicated. Do you need to go to school to learn how to give food to people? No. No. If somebody tells you that they need, in New York City in the winter, that they need coats and boots, East Coast clothing, you don't have to go to an organizing workshop to figure that out. You just use, as my mother called it, mother wit, common sense, and you figure out how to find things that people have asked for. So this really threatened the United States government at the time. As a matter of fact, in one of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI COINTELPRO memos, he said, I'm not worried about any guns they have. It's that breakfast program I'm concerned with. Do you see?
Yeah.
So, and why would anybody even have a gun? Well, I never had one, never learned how to use one, wasn't interested. But if your door, Nick, is continually being knocked down and people who you did not invite walk in and begin beating and or shooting you, you would want to have something to protect yourself. But I'm saying also that was a given, that defending ourselves was all of these programs. you know, I could tell you story after story after story, and we don't have time for that. But these programs have never been forgotten by the people who had access to them. And when I was an instructor and or a professor, people would come to me all the time to say, I was one of those little kids in the San Francisco breakfast program, or I was one of the kids that whose mom got tested for sickle cell. And when my parents realized that I have sickle cell anemia, because of the Black Panther Party's community clinics, my mother was able to advocate for me. It's amazing.
Mhm.
It's so touching. And I just want to stop and for a moment say that we did all of this not from hate. We weren't fighting against, we were fighting for, and we were driven by love.
Yeah, I feel like, when people call for, defunding the police or abolishing prisons, or even, transformational reform, if you're not for abolition, it's always, if you're arguing for mass incarceration or whatever it is, it's like, okay, what do we do? But if you look at the history of the Black Panther Party and, the programs that survived, or, it's all there. It's like these communities are being starved, and if the solutions are, I think, are like common sense, as you said. And I love how you said, mentioning bringing joy into, children's education, to Black children's education. And it reminded me of what you were saying, Jill, and how so many of our youth, Black youth in particular, are criminalized in the school system, whether it's, undiagnosed learning differences, or, cycles of abuse and trauma that play out in the classroom. And you have SROs and things like that, that just kind of engage them into the cycle of the mass incarceration. But if we center our movement on joy, how transformational that is. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about this connection between the past and the present. Just so many parallels that I see in the movement today for Black lives and the Black Panther movement, this unapologetic occupation of space, demanding, not asking for justice, not asking for permission, participating in civil disobedience, so that way the message, the demands are amplified and heard. If you could, Jill and James, what is it like for you, inheriting this moment and all the history that led up to it, in this current, I guess, kind of reawakening of the revolution?
That's a lot. One, I wanted to say, just to tag on to what you were just talking about, that the school to prisons program doesn't even have to do with behavioral issues or anything. That could be it. That could be what they label you. But 9 times out of 10, I don't have any statistics, so I'm not speaking from that perspective, but it really just simply is the Black child in the room, or the Black school, and where you have, so it's not just about the SROs, it's not just about learning differences, it's not that. Those are all true, and those all exist. And in a world based on equity, all of those kids would get services, right? Mm-hmm. But you have brilliant, amazing geniuses in these classrooms, and Black girls and Black boys and brown girls and brown boys that are not coming to fruition because of the level of invisibility that they're not seen as capable of being smart, much less a genius. And it circles back to the mural and the point of the mural and everything that we're talking about, of what it means when you're taught your history, and when you're sitting in a classroom and you're talking about your liberation, versus you're in a classroom and there's one chapter of how you're a slave, and there's one chapter on Martin Luther King, but guess what, he was murdered, and all of those things. That's how I was raised in Chicago. There was a chapter on slaves. We were not called enslaved Africans, it was just slaves. And there was a chapter I think on Rosa Parks maybe, but not really the Montgomery bus boycott. And there was a chapter on Martin Luther King. And I feel like in my memory, there was more information about his assassination than there was about his work, right? So there's these underlying things that you learn as a Black child that I feel like a lot of people learn, that, oh, well, you know, don't rise up because you'll be assassinated. Don't speak up, don't single out yourself, you know? And I watched that happen with the Panther Party. You know, they were people that were singled out and systematically dismantled, being told that they were, you know, terrorists and a threat to the state. And J. Edgar Hoover like lost sleep over how to destroy these groups of people, many groups of people, not just the Panthers, but that is but more of my information. And so it's the kind of thing that when you look at the Panther history way back at Merritt College in the very beginning, when they start creating classes where they're teaching Black history and they're teaching African American history, and how you have homies and sisters coming up off the street to come into these classrooms over on MLK because they're like, oh, wait, you're talking about me in a good way, in a positive way? I want to hear that. And again, it goes back to the analogy of you're on the corner like this, you walk into a classroom and you hear about the people fighting for you and your back straightens. It's just innate. It's innate. You cannot help but happen. And so that's the kind of thing. It's like if that mural creates a classroom for, you know, so I'm 2 blocks from Prescott Elementary School on Peralta and 9th. And all the kids walk by my house. For 20 years, they've walked by my house. And that's what it's about. I want those kids to walk by the house while the mural's being painted. And James and I have talked about that. They will be able to paint some of it if they want to. And then they're gonna walk by the house from kindergarten, 1st grade, all the way to 6th grade. And they're gonna look up at that mural, and that becomes their history. And it's a celebration in their community. And I absolutely positively believe that that will create change and that will make a difference. And all I can do is this, you know, there's only so much one person can do, but we have to at least try. And I don't know what else to do. I genuinely don't know what else to do. And it's so frustrating and infuriating when I see so many people struggling and all of us fighting and then 6 months later, it feels like it's back to the same. So I want this to have longevity. I want it to be there forever. And I want the community I want it to resonate with the community forever. And like James was saying, and like Ericka said, you know, the way we define revolution and revolutionary is so different, and it morphs through the generations. And sadly, the laws also morph with that. Right? So things that the Panthers did, then laws were instated. If you remember, like going into state facilities and open carry, all of those things, the laws change. And so for me, my inheriting this information or being descendants of these women is knowing that I just have to keep going. I just have to keep finding something else to do. And I genuinely feel like, and I think if you were to ask people that know me, I have been active and an activist and activated in some way, shape, or form since I arrived at San Francisco State. Prior to that, it was a different level, but you know, this is more focused. And whether it's the conversations that you're in, the company that you keep, the company that you dismiss, I think all of those things for me are a part of what I've been taught by this history.
Yeah, thank you for challenging me on that comment. When you have a system that is built to enforce white supremacy with Eurocentric, narratives of history, of course, any child, particularly a Black child, will be left out of that, and there's so much violence that happens within our school systems around that. But yeah, thank you for that. James, I wanted to ask you, we talked about kind of your research and things around the history, but in terms of you know, just your place right now in this moment, your connections to the past, and you know, your grounding in the now. How does it feel for you, just emotionally, or you know, on a level of consciousness, just to be in this moment that we are now?
Yeah, I think as someone that struggles a lot with being present, um, due to kind of this onslaught of information and stimuli that we encounter every day, whether it's technology, emotional, or what have you, there's a lot of messaging going around. And that feeling of being overwhelmed with that messaging, as simple as being overwhelmed by Black Lives Matter, is just like, man, I don't know what message I'm holding on to and what message I'm stating, you know, I'm feeling confident in. And being able to be on this project, to do this research, to have access to these historical elders that are still doing the work, settles me, right? It settles me in a space to where I can work confidently and I can create confidently, knowing that I am a part of this mission. Much of, you know, much in the same way of the spirit of the Panthers that continue to stay on that mission as it evolved and changed, and women took a more direct role of leadership and impact. And so I just feel grounded in that wave, you know, and even being a man and thinking about how I'm taking on this new narrative that's being presented by Black women from Black women, you know, and being able to be centralized in that. So when I'm hearing outside noise, or hearing people that are trying to challenge the narrative of Black women, that I can contribute to it, you know, in a way that's not only beneficial for me, but for other Black men at large, and of course, our community that needs to see that.
And if I could just interject to that the three of us in our first conversation, we talked about Asayla Gale Dixon and Ericka Lewis being the first artists and female artists of the Black Panther Party, but not names that we know. And in that conversation, we talked about the fact that there's very specific reason why there is a Black male lead artist on this project, in that we as Black women have for many years been saying, say her name, say her name, say her name. And there is often a shift, as we're seeing in this rebellion of 2020, what happens to the Black liberation movement when white people start fighting for it and white people start holding the signs. It's very similar when you are talking about Black women and Black men start holding the signs and saying the movement. So there was a way in which I felt very intentional in choosing an Oakland artist, choosing a Black artist, but choosing a male artist to be the lead, to be the person that's going to choose all the other artists on the team and create this image, because I feel like it's a part of our healing. It's a part of our healing for that shift. And Ericka mentioned at the very beginning, when men are allowed to express themselves and their emotions, you know, we can release so much of our oppression. And I feel like this is a part of that process. And I want as many parts of this process as possible to be centered around healing and mental health and happiness, which I think all three of us could agree is what's happening. It's what we're feeling and it's what we're experiencing. And the people that we're interfacing with are experiencing it as well. So, yeah.
I love that idea, Jill. You know, I feel like we've mentioned in many ways, you know, the kind of the connection between, you know, our inner personal healing and, you know, our outward kind of healing of our communities. I want to talk about, you know, the role in art and spirituality and things like that contribute to the movement and revolution, as we talked about. So, Eric, I know this is something that's really central to your work. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as the connection between poetry, art, inner healing, and activism, or between activism and inner spirituality?
Well, I don't see them as separate. That could be my answer, but I'm sure you want a little bit more, right, Nick? I think that the way we've been socialized is, and I might be repeating myself, but it's important to say it again so that it lands, that the United States was set in a paradigm that didn't include us. And it was just, you know, immigrant European men setting up a country. Well, of course, they weren't going to think about the indigenous people who were already here, and eventually the enslaved Africans that they brought to do all kinds of work. Some of it quite heinous, actually. And then, you know, it's in that community of slave women, in the community of enslaved men and children, because children were born into slavery. And only the whim of the person who owned that human being would allow you to be free of it. Think about that for a second, everybody who's listening. So though slavery ended on paper, the overarching structural systems did not end. Otherwise, we would not be here today. James would be thinking of a mural that just, I don't know, something a little bit different, I'm sure, than this. There wouldn't have been, the Black Panther Party would not have been needed, because if those structures had shifted that told us we weren't really human. Not just that, Nick, I don't know how you identify racially or ethnically.
I identify as Filipino American.
So definitely you were not in the minds or included in the positive gaze of the people who started this country. And now with the backlash to immigrant peoples, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. James would not be here if it weren't for people calling for prison abolition. Why am I saying that about James? I'm saying it so matter-of-factly, but I thought about it while we were talking earlier. The cradle to prison pipeline is no joke. It could be that James would have had a different life and not an artist's life. So what we wanted was for all the writers, all the artists, all the dancers, all the singers, all of the poets to come together in the 60s and 70s and also call themselves activists. And that's what they did. Tarika Lewis was the very first woman to join the Black Panther Party. She was 16 years old, and she was a master violin player. Is that what we think of the Black Panther Party? No, we don't. First of all, we might not think about somebody that young feeling so moved to serve her people. So, and she still plays the violin very beautifully, but we don't even think of Black violin players, do we? Not really. So during the time that the Black Panther Party existed, we kind of parked our artistic endeavors for things like the community survival programs that may include art and maybe not, because there were bigger issues like health care. like just having food, like right now, having shelter of any kind. And so it was all one thing for us. As a matter of fact, if we research in history, and James, I don't know if you've had a chance to fully research this yet, it's very beautiful, but the Black arts movement of the
Yeah, sure.
60s and forward, yes, didn't separate itself from activism. And I've said this many times, sometimes some poet would hit the stage because it was some big university poet thing and they were reading and being the beloved Black poet. And they would turn that money that they got over to get somebody out of, to make somebody's bail would have been sitting in prison. And today we can replicate this kind of thing. And so when I say that James might not be here, I'm being honest because I go inside the prisons and I see the amazing artists sitting there and the poets and the authors and the dancers and the good human beings who are in that carceral site. Some parts of our communities are carceral sites, like the trafficking of young Black and brown women. They're being incarcerated. So we've got to think differently and bigger and broader and deeper about who we are. And we have all of these parts of ourselves. So there's not an Ericka that's a poet part. There's not an Ericka that's a mother part. You know, it's all one me, like there's all one Nick, right? And you're not just a radio show host. Well, I hope that's not all you are. I don't assume that. But there are people who box us in, and part of our job is to jump out of all these contiguous boxes. They're not really made of anything. If we believe that and can imagine that we can be free of these ways we have been seen, then we can do really wonderful work. So I'm always working with artists very intentionally. I feel like Jill is an artist. How on earth would she come up with such a radical, imaginative thing? And then send a little picture of what part of her house is going to be what and where the names of the women are going to go. We're all like that if left alone. And the women who I met and loved in the Black Panther Party and wish that, like everything, I could see them again, not because of COVID, but because life took its toll. They were like that. They were brave. And there are still those of us who are brave. And it's important that we honor people while they're alive for all the aspects of themselves. And it takes some rethinking and revising of our own understandings of history. So I kind of went everywhere in answer to your question, but I don't know that that's not a good thing.
No, it was a great thing, Ericka. Thank you for everything that you said. You know, I do want to be respectful of all of your time. I feel like we could talk forever, but I do want to kind of, you know, go back to the project and ask Jill and James, you know, where is the Mural at now in the creation process, and how could folks out there listening or viewing help?
Well, in answer to Ericka referring to me as an artist, which of course you saw my eyes completely bug out, I have a family of artists and I do not consider myself one of them, coming under my sisters and mother. But one of my dear friends, Tara, actually referred to me recently that I'm the midwife of artists. So what I usually do pre-COVID is I work with, in production with musical artists, and have worked with Tribe Called Quest, and most recently was on tour with Lauryn Hill. And I don't have no desire whatsoever to be on the stage or do anything, but I'm very much focused on birthing art. And I never thought of myself as that until she said that. And I was like, that's what I do. I make a way for it. And it was very profound to me because I've always wanted to be an artist. And to now hold that space, if I can be a person who makes way for art, who creates a space for art, who encourages art to exist, especially art that's based in liberation and community art, not something that's hidden in my house, but something that everybody can enjoy, which is pretty much what the tour business is about. When you're on stage and you see 70,000 people and you know that you were a part of putting that show on, it's really quite amazing when you are at the end of that day. So I'm the midwife. I'm just gonna say that. I'm the doula. But as far as where the mural is today, we just finished an amazing Kickstarter campaign where we met our goal, luckily and thankfully, because it was an all or nothing campaign. So you have to put your goal low to make sure that you make it so you don't walk with a nothing. But we are still fundraising. We have a beautiful website up. The project has gotten so much bigger than initially anticipated. The house in preparation and scraping and whatnot is bigger than we anticipated. So we're still fundraising. I want to encourage everybody to go to our website and donate if they can. And James, I believe, can speak to the team that he's created. Right now, I'm on the side of just prepping the house. So I've got scaffolding around everywhere. Thank baby black Jesus that they took the plastic off my windows yesterday because it was so hot. I thought I was going to die, and there's no reprieve going outside. So they were leaving for the weekend, and I said, can you please, I will die in here. So they took all the plastic off, but the scaffolding is still here. There's a first coat of primer on the house. They've got to come back and start patching it so it's a smooth surface from James and his team. All the repairs have been made, but yeah, I'm focusing on the fundraising aspect and getting the word out. And we're checking in periodically, me and James, about the design, but he's the lead designer and kind of like creating that image. And encouraging everybody to go to the website, because as we get things created, like this educational workbook and hoodies and swag and other things, all of that will be available online. And I'm gonna do my best to keep everybody updated by posting pictures on Instagram, because so many people have donated and so many people are just over the moon excited about this process. And I'm very grateful for COVID because I can focus on it. You know, I'm not someplace else, and it's really been a joy to focus on it every day. So that's where we are. We're fundraising and we're finalizing the imagery. The mural team will arrive on the property sometime late September. So between now and the next 10 days, the house will finish its prep, and then it'll sit quiet for about 25 days or so. And then James and his team will come back in. And with all the booms and the lifts and the cherry pickers, I'm very excited. I've never seen a mural go up before. So I'm super excited to be able to witness that. And then the ideal date, we're going to be finished sometime the second week of October. And then we're going to have a beautiful block party unveiling community event on October 17th, which also coincides with the October anniversary of the Black Panther Party. And yeah, so we'll have a stage and speakers and poets, and Destiny Arts is supposed to perform, and we'll have speakers and jumpy houses and porta potties and masks. So.
And can you say the name of the website?
It's WBPPmural.com. So the acronym for Women Black Panther Party Mural.com. And it'll be posted on the link, I believe. Thank you, Ericka.
Yeah. October 17th, I'm marking that on my calendar. It sounds like it's going to be a beautiful celebration. James, do you want to speak a little bit about the creative process and your team building?
Yeah. Well, for one, I've just been having a really good time researching and taking inspiration. I think another thing that I've learned is just the power of culture, right? And Black culture in America is so powerful that even through our imagery, we convey messages and we resonate with the world. And so I've just really been pulling on that by being fortunate enough to have access to archives through the Oakland Museum, through the Huey P. Newton Foundation, and even other community members that have their own personal collections of Panther history. And so those are all the inspirations that I've been pulling from, and as I've been working myself up for some finalized designs. And as far as collaboration, just in the spirit of Oakland and the spirit of Panthers, we've been pulling from the community, and I've partnered with BAMP, which is Bay Area Mural Program. Also, along with Aerosol, that's another local art and mural collective that has been putting in work on behalf of the Panthers and the Black community. So it feels good to be in the space of being another link, you know, in this chain that's really serving the community and putting something on the map. Not only in Oakland, but for the world, because I believe that once this mural goes up, the trajectory of all these other murals throughout the nation will continue to go up, honoring the Panthers and women, specifically in the Black women of the Panther Party, but also realizing that to do so is to honor the Black Panther Party, right? Because they have been front and center in so many ways, and the things that we want to honor, like they're directly behind. So it's good, man, and I'm really just looking forward to continuing this development process.
Beautiful. Before we part, any final messages to our listeners or viewers out there? Any calls to action? Ericka, you shaking your head.
Yeah,
Jill, James.
Oh, a call to action, support the mural.
Yes.
And support one another. For people who are listening, resist the urge to critique and step in and offer. And it doesn't have to be money if that's not what you have. There's so many things that we can offer. So we live in a very critique-focused world. And we can just, you know, we can give. And Jill is already surrounded by people who, right, Jill, who want to help.
Yeah.
And if you have a way that you can help, then go to the website and let Jill know. Or let James know that you want to help in some way with the mural. I have no idea what that means for anybody who's listening to me, but people do know. And that's kind of how the Black Panther Party was. People would walk in the doors of party offices all over the world, actually. We had chapters outside of the United States, almost every continent. And people would just walk in and say, I want to be a part of the Black Panther Party. And so they were. And they helped with programs, they helped to raise funds. I don't have time to talk about Oakland Community School, but we had so many volunteers. And originally, that's how we were able to serve the children 3 meals a day. Mm-hmm. So community, the village model, rather than that highly constructed state model or nation state model. The village is more like a circle. So that's what my last words are. be of help if you can.
Mhm. Thank you, Ericka. That's, yes, I would absolutely agree. There's so many different ways to help. I've had, I met a new friend named Sun Helen who offered to make flyers because she was a graphic designer, and
Wow.
she made flyers and she got them printed and she wheat pasted and stapled them everywhere. And I know it made an effect because donations started coming in. I started getting text messages. So there's all different ways that you can help raise funds without donating. And there's all kinds of ways that you can support the mural, even if you're not a painter or whatever. So, but if you know somebody that can donate $10,000, by all means, contact me. And, the other thing I was going to say is part of the motivation is the words, all the monuments and the statues and everything that were being pulled down around the country of all of these, Robert E. Lee's and the school names of people that we were celebrating from history that were our oppressors. And this mural is a part of that shift that we need to have as a community, as a people. It's not what they need to do, but it's what we need to do. So much of our life is centered around they. And I am not okay with that anymore. It's still difficult for me because I am born of this country like the rest of us on the screen, but I'm really trying to focus on us. What are we doing? We know what they're doing. They're predictable and consistent. But what are we doing? And what we can do is we can create monuments to the people that fought and died for our liberation. And that's what we can show our children. That's what we can show people outside of our community. We weren't just slaves. And I think that I've been a long time since I was 6th grade. Hopefully they're teaching more than that, but this is a part of adding to the history of the poor and oppressed and the Black and brown people of this country. There's such a huge, joyous part that is often left out of the narrative and really has so much to do with our mental health and our mental ease.
Thank you, Jill. James, any parting messages from you? Any calls to action for our listeners?
Sure. I mean, one, this is a call to all creatives, all types of artists, is that the opportunity is now. You know what I mean? Like, put your voice out there, put your message out there, whatever you're feeling, challenge yourself, and challenge your political and community activism. Because now I look back on my life and realize there's so many moments, whether it was through education, belonging to my church family, what have you, where we were being revolutionary in our actions and demonstrating that love for our community. And I think that as visual artists, especially with us having to slow down as a nation and a world, we can't take for granted how many eyes are on us, right? And how many eyes are on the work that we're able to create. So it's just a challenge to go out and make something, go out and put it out, because that energy is going to carry. It's going to carry. And then secondly, donate to this project. We need, we're in need of funding, because the more funding we have, the further we can push this, whether it's through the coloring books, whether it's through the production or post-production, and how we can continue to share and continue to create and not leave it at just this one mural project.
All right. Well, thank you, Ericka. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, James. I feel like the wisdom and truth that you shared on this call, I've learned so much from, and it's been a real blessing. So I appreciate you taking the time. And yes, everybody out there, donate, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
Thank you.
Nick.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, y'all.
All right. Have a beautiful evening.
You too.